The death of a Russian bodybuilder at just 35 years old hit the fitness world like a bomb. A young man, seemingly in peak physical condition, known for a body that looked like it pushed human limits. The news spread fast, triggering shock, curiosity, and a flood of questions. How can someone so strong just vanish like that? He became a symbol of an extreme ideal: massive muscles, an eye-catching look, instant recognition. But behind that almost unreal physique, there was an obsessive pursuit of perfection, a hunger that never seemed to be satisfied. This video isn't just about the death itself. It's about the full journey, the humble beginning, the rise, the choices made along the way, and most importantly, the silent consequences that built up over the years. Every decision came with a price, even when it seemed harmless at the time. Nikita Tkachuk was born in 1990 in the city of Vorkuta, one of the coldest and most isolated regions in Russia. A place shaped by brutal winters, limited opportunities, and a tough routine from an early age. Growing up there wasn't easy, and because of that, every achievement demanded twice the effort. Nothing came for free. From a young age, Nikita found refuge in physical training. Where most people saw limits, he saw challenges. He trained in small neighborhood gyms. No mirrors, no modern equipment, no glamour at all. Just iron, discipline, and repetition. A raw environment that shaped not only his body, but his mindset. Even without proper structure, his dedication stood out. He took training seriously, stuck to strict schedules, pushed to improve every single session, and treated the sport as a lifelong commitment. At that point, it wasn't about looks or vanity. It was a genuine passion for strength and physical development. After finishing school, Nikita decided to take a bigger step. He moved to Ukhta, where he found better training conditions and, more importantly, a community that shared the same goals. That's where he began competing in powerlifting, surrounded by experienced coaches and athletes. This period marked the real beginning of his athletic path. In Ukhta, Nikita wasn't just another young guy lifting weights. He was becoming someone willing to push his body to extremes, someone ready to go beyond what most considered normal. It didn't take long for him to stand out in powerlifting. His name started circulating among athletes and coaches in the region. The strength he showed was far from ordinary, even by competitive standards. It impressed people who were already used to seeing elite lifters. Still very young, he started posting numbers that looked unreal. In the deadlift, he reached 350 kilograms, about 772 pounds. In the squat, 360 kilograms, roughly 794 pounds. On the bench press, he pushed 210 kilograms, around 463 pounds. Numbers that would put any athlete on the national radar. Those results didn't come from talent alone. They were the product of years of brutal training, consistency, and an almost obsessive drive to improve. At just 21 years old, he achieved the highest recognition in Russian sports, the title of Master of Sport of Russia, an honor that's highly respected and extremely difficult to earn. As time went on, something began to shift. Extreme strength, once the ultimate goal, no longer felt like enough. Lifting insane numbers stopped filling the growing emptiness inside. Nikita wanted more than just being strong. He wanted to look strong, to make an impact, to turn heads. Slowly, the focus moved away from loaded barbells and toward the mirror. The new dream was an aesthetic, symmetrical physique, stage-ready and perfect for social media. Winning through performance wasn't enough anymore. He needed to impress visually. That's when the transition from powerlifting to bodybuilding began. This change wasn't just physical, it was mental. Training was now designed around size, proportions, and visual impact. The body stopped being just a tool for strength and became a product. To take this next step, Nikita moved to St. Petersburg, a major urban center with far more opportunities. There, he became a personal trainer, started working with clients, creating content, and fully immersed himself in the professional fitness scene. His social media presence grew quickly. Brand partnerships followed, along with educational videos and collaborations involving supplements and pharmacology. In 2013, just as everything seemed to be going in the right direction, the first major warning sign appeared out of nowhere. Nikita was rushed to the hospital with serious respiratory issues. Doctors initially believed it was a standard case of pneumonia and began conventional treatment. But instead of improving, his condition worsened day after day. The situation became critical. Both of Nikita's lungs were filled with fluid, and he was literally hovering between life and death. Nothing seemed to work. It was only after some time, when his condition was already extremely severe, that doctors finally reached the correct diagnosis: pulmonary sarcoidosis, a systemic inflammatory disease that can affect multiple organs in the body. Proper treatment eventually stabilized his condition and saved his life. But along with that relief came a silent and dangerous issue: lack of guidance. Nikita was never clearly informed about the possible long-term consequences of the disease or the risks it could pose down the road. Without those warnings, life went on almost normally. The symptoms disappeared, test results looked acceptable, and it felt like the problem was in the past. But sarcoidosis is deceptive. To make things even more delicate, there was a troubling family history. Nikita's mother had died from lung cancer, despite never having smoked. His lungs, therefore, were already a genetic weak point. One of the most dangerous aspects of sarcoidosis is something most people never notice. It can cause hypercalcemia, which is excess calcium in the bloodstream. At first glance, that sounds like just a minor clinical detail. But over time, this imbalance can turn into a ticking time bomb inside the body. The real problem is that calcium doesn't just stay in the blood. It can silently deposit in critical areas like blood vessels, the kidneys, and various internal organs. These deposits don't cause immediate pain, don't trigger obvious symptoms, and often go completely unnoticed. For years, routine medical exams showed nothing alarming. The numbers looked fine, reports were reassuring, and everything suggested that Nikita was healthy enough to keep training and living normally. On the outside, there were no clear red flags. In 2021, another major blow hit Nikita's health. He caught the virus that spread worldwide starting in 2019, and for a body already carrying hidden vulnerabilities, the impact was devastating. What seemed like just another challenge ended up becoming a turning point in his life. The hospitalization was long and brutal. Nikita spent an entire month in the hospital, struggling to breathe as his lungs went through progressive failure. This wasn't just a routine infection. It was the body collecting the bill for years of overload and accumulated damage. When he was finally discharged, the diagnosis changed everything. He had lost around 30% of his lung capacity. On top of that, part of his healthy lung tissue had been replaced by fibrosis, an irreversible condition known as pulmonary fibrosis. Oxygen exchange was no longer happening the way it should. For someone carrying that much muscle mass, this loss was especially cruel. His body demanded far more oxygen than his lungs could deliver. Simple things for most people, like walking a short distance, became exhausting and distressing. At first, Nikita could barely walk about 50 meters, roughly 160 feet, without needing to stop. Every step came with shortness of breath, dizziness, and overwhelming fatigue. Alongside the health issues, there was another decisive factor in this story: the continued use of chemical substances. Nikita began using synthol and anabolic steroids heavily, chasing a level of muscle size that would be visually shocking. The goal was no longer just progress. It was to become impossible to ignore. Over time, his muscles reached proportions considered unattainable naturally. Arms, shoulders, and chest grew to extreme levels, creating an image that instantly grabbed attention on social media. To the audience, it looked like success. To his body, it was constant and dangerous overload. During this period, Nikita signed a contract with a pharmaceutical company to promote products tied to muscular appearance. From that point on, his body was no longer just personal. It became part of a commercial agreement. His image had to be maintained, no matter the cost. Reports suggest that the contract didn't allow him to stop the applications, even when warning signs were already showing. Stopping meant breaking deals, losing partnerships, and damaging the image he had built. The trap was set. The more famous he became, the less control he had over his own body. In April 2024, Nikita's body finally sent a signal that couldn't be ignored. An abscess appeared on his left leg, near the hip. At first glance, it seemed like just another localized issue, something a simple surgery could fix. But what doctors found changed everything. During the emergency surgery came the shock. There was no pus. The cavity was filled with solid calcium, something extremely rare and deeply alarming. The surgeons themselves said they had never seen anything like it. This was no longer a local problem. It was a serious warning that something much bigger was happening inside his body. Over the following days, the situation deteriorated fast. Calcium kept accumulating in the wound, forcing 3 surgeries in just 6 days, all under general anesthesia. The opening became massive and impossible to close at that point. Even without signs of infection, the situation was terrifying and completely outside any normal pattern. What worried doctors the most was their final conclusion. Calcium wasn't building up only where injections had occurred. It was depositing throughout his body in multiple regions. That ruled out any simple explanation and pointed to an advanced systemic issue. It became clear that the collapse hadn't started that month. April 2024 was simply the moment when the body, after years of silence, finally screamed. About 3 weeks after the surgeries, new signs began to appear, and this time they were even more severe. Swelling, constant malaise, and abnormal lab results made it obvious something was wrong. Soon came the confirmation. His kidneys were beginning to fail. What once looked like a localized problem was now affecting one of the body's most vital systems. Nikita was admitted to one of the top hospitals in Moscow, under the care of high-level specialists. The atmosphere was tense, but there was still hope. Doctors started aggressive treatment to slow the progression and stabilize kidney function as quickly as possible. In June 2024, what sounded like good news arrived. Nikita was discharged. Tests showed creatinine and urea levels within normal range. There was no need for dialysis at that point, and no talk of a transplant. To everyone around him, it felt like a victory after months of suffering. But that improvement hid a dangerous truth. The treatment managed to control the calcium circulating in his blood, but it had no effect on the calcium that had already settled into organs and blood vessels over the years. That couldn't be removed. The damage was done. On the outside, it looked like recovery. On the inside, it was only a truce. A deceptive calm before the next fall. Early 2025 brought something Nikita hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. There was some mild shortness of breath here and there, but nothing alarming, nothing beyond what he had already lived with. Doctors believed it was just a leftover effect from his lung issues, something manageable. Monthly checkups reinforced that sense of safety. The results were described as great, all within expected ranges. Kidneys functioning, markers stable, no emergencies in sight. After so many years of fighting, it finally felt like the worst was behind him. In real life, Nikita started living again. He went out with friends, rediscovered small, everyday pleasures, and got back on his motorcycle, something that always made him feel free. He planned summer trips with his wife and their 2 dogs, making simple plans filled with meaning. From the outside, it was hard to believe everything he had survived. His expression looked lighter, his energy different. For the first time in a long while, there was hope for the future, not just anxiety about the next test or hospital stay. On May 16th, what seemed like a minor warning sign caught attention: swelling in his feet. Nikita was still urinating normally, and after so many false alarms over the years, it didn't feel urgent. Nothing suggested that this would be the beginning of the end. On the morning of May 17th, everything changed abruptly. Nikita woke up terrified and told his wife he had completely stopped urinating. Not a single drop. An ambulance was called immediately. At the hospital, the first test brought a devastating sentence, overheard in the hallway. He has no kidneys. His kidneys were completely destroyed. With no kidney function, every bit of fluid he consumed began to accumulate inside his body. The excess spread into the tissues and quickly into the lungs, causing severe pulmonary edema. His breathing worsened by the minute. Oxygen saturation, which had been at 96%, dropped rapidly to 70%, a critical, life-threatening level. His blood pressure fell to numbers practically incompatible with life. Even experienced doctors said they had never seen someone conscious with readings that low. The situation was so severe that top specialists were urgently called in to take over the case. Nikita was taken straight to the ICU, placed on emergency dialysis, and due to extreme instability, doctors decided to put him into an induced coma. It was the only chance for his body to tolerate the treatment. After hours of intense struggle in the ICU, a brief moment of hope appeared. Doctors managed to stabilize Nikita for a short period, and for those watching from the outside, it seemed like he might pull through once again. After so many years facing extreme situations, that small improvement felt almost like a miracle. But the stability didn't last. His body, already exhausted and overloaded by years of accumulated damage, began to fail again. One organ after another stopped responding, making it clear the limit had been permanently crossed. This was no longer an isolated crisis, but a full systemic collapse. On May 18, 2025, in St. Petersburg, Nikita passed away at the age of 35. The official cause was multiple organ failure, the direct result of years of chemical overload, systemic illness, and silent damage that had built up with no possibility of reversal. His death wasn't sudden, and it wasn't unexpected for his body. It was the final outcome of a long chain of choices, illnesses, and consequences. A painful ending, not just because of what happened in his final days, but because of everything that had been built along the way. After his passing, Nikita was cremated, in accordance with a wish he had clearly expressed while still alive. The man who built a massive, seemingly indestructible body said goodbye quietly, leaving behind a story that is raw, real, and impossible to ignore. Before he died, Nikita left behind something heavier than any trophy or record: regret. He openly and painfully acknowledged that he had crossed lines that should never have been crossed. This wasn't a generic statement or a throwaway line. It was a sincere message from someone who felt the cost of those choices in his own body. He directly asked others not to follow the same path, not to believe that anything is worth it for an extreme physique, not to ignore warning signs from the body in exchange for fame, contracts, or social media validation. It was a warning from someone who no longer had time to fix his own mistakes. Nikita's story goes far beyond an isolated case. It exposes a dangerous system built on aesthetic obsession, pressure for unrealistic results, and commercial deals that turn the human body into a product. If this story impacted you in any way, it has already served its purpose. Nikita's journey isn't about judgment, it's about awareness. About understanding that behind extreme bodies are decisions, pressures, and consequences that almost never show up on social media. Reflecting on that is the first step toward making more conscious choices. If you believe this kind of content needs to reach more people, hit the like button right now. It may seem simple, but it helps the channel a lot to keep bringing real, deep, and necessary stories like this one. Every like is a sign that this work matters. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, you'll find stories that go beyond the surface, without glamorizing what needs to be treated with responsibility.